In the discussions, several of you mentioned having difficulty with the qualitative data and creating the categorical frequency distributions. I really think that perhaps it's the way the questions are presented, or that a lot of you are overthinking it in terms of how to do this. The data sets that we'll deal with in this course are small enough that you could actually do these by hand and not rely on Microsoft Excel or Minitab or some other sort of software. So I want to walk through by hand how to do this. This is an example from the practice problems or the homework problems. And it says, 20 patrons were asked to respond to a survey question about the reason for visiting a local library. And the data set is below. Okay, and so they give you the 20 responses. This list right here, kind of in the middle, is your data. And it is qualitative because the responses are words or phrases, and it would be at the nominal level, because the fact that you're going to meet someone is not necessarily better than the fact that you're going to study or to check out books. And then they give you kind of the layout that you need to use for your frequency distribution, okay? But at least initially here, I'm going to ignore this. And I'm going to do it as if I were doing it from scratch by hand, okay? So we would start out with our categories, okay? In a categorical frequency distribution, the first column is our categories, and in this case, it's going to refer to the reason that we're going to the library. Oftentimes we try to order them. Usually we put them in alphabetical order. So in this case, we've got three options. We're going to check out books. We're going to meet someone. And we're going to study. Okay, so I'm going to add a column here. I'm going to add a tally column. And then we will have our frequency. And finally, we'll have our relative frequency. Okay, so then what I'm going to do, once I kind of get the basic layout of the table set up, I go through the list of data, and each time a value occurs, I'm going to put a tally mark. So, and I'm going to go down the columns. So I would have study, study, meet someone, check out books, study. Top of the second column, meet someone, study, check out books, study, check out books. Third column, check out books, meet someone, study, study, check out books. Fourth column, meet someone, check out books, study, meet someone, and check out books. Okay, so I have the tally marks. Now, my tallies become the frequency. The frequency is the numeric count. It's a number. Okay, so for the frequency, you're going to give me a number, and I can find that number by counting up the tally marks. So for checkout books, I have 5, 6, 7. So my frequency is 7. Meet someone is 5, and study is 8. Now, before I proceed, I'm going to total up that frequency, because the total frequency should equal the total number of responses that I had, and I was told in the beginning that I had 20 responses. And I do total to 20, which means I didn't miss any. That's a good thing. Okay. And then I have to actually do some calculations to find the relative frequency. The relative frequency is usually expressed either as a decimal, a fraction, or a percent. And then one of the reasons we use the relative frequency is so that we can make comparison between different sized groups. This group has 20 responses. If I did the survey tomorrow and maybe had 25 responses, I wouldn't be able to compare them apples to apples or oranges to oranges because they were different sized groups. This is a formula, and the formula for finding the relative frequency is you take the frequency and divide it by the total number. If you want it to be a percentage, you multiply by 100%. And again, different authors, different instructors may have you put it as decimals. Some may have you put it as a fraction. So for checkout books, that would be a frequency of 7 divided by 20, which is 0.35, or as a percentage would be 35%. For meet someone, we would have 5 over 20, which is 25%, or 0.25, excuse me, as a decimal, or 25%. And then finally, you would have 8 out of 20, or 40.40, or 40%. Now, because again, even with relative frequency, you're including all of your data values, it has to total to 1 or 100%. So 35% plus 25% is 60%, plus 0.40 would be 1 or 100%. Okay, so now I have it created, and I do have an extra column. Now I'm going to go back to the table that's given in there, because what's happening here is that it's set up in D2L as a matching problem. And so the frequency for checkout books corresponds to letter A. The meet someone corresponds to letter C. This is letter E, and then the total is G. For your relative frequency, you have B, D, F, and H. That's what those letters are for. That's the way to help you match them up. Then when once you get your table set up and you kind of have it matched, you can go into that particular question and begin to answer them. It's set up in 2 columns. You have the questions on the left and the choices on the right. It says, what is the frequency of the first class, which corresponds to letter A? Well, our frequency, and you have to pay attention here, the frequency is the count, which was, let's see, 7. So I'm going to match that to number 1. What is the relative frequency of the first class? That's B, again, because it's asking you for the relative frequency. The relative frequency was 0.35. So I'm going to look down this list of options, and I notice that 0.35 is option 5. What is the relative frequency of the second class? That corresponds to D. D was 25% or 0.25. So again, you got to scroll the choices on the right. That was option 6, and you match them up. Each option 1 through 8 will only be used one time with the matching. Okay, so I'm hoping that you guys are just overthinking it, or the layout of the question was causing confusion. But hopefully this video will help you understand better how to deal with those particular type problems.